Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here. And I have today two guys who probably don't need any introductions. They are more well known than I am, I'm sure. Arne and Carlos, welcome to my channel.
Thank
Hello.
you. Hello.
Well, I've been watching you for ever and a half. And what I noticed right away is what I find the most inspirational about watching you two is nothing came easy. Nothing was given to you on silver platter. It sort of was a lot of hustling and trying and failing and working odd jobs and things like that. And I love the story of how you two met, that it was through mutual friends and it was years in the making. And it seemed like love from the first sight. And since that moment, you do everything together. Do
Yeah.
you ever get on each other's nerve?
Not
No,
really.
actually, we do a lot of traveling I mean, the good thing is we get to experience all these things, especially the travel, which I personally love. And I am so lucky that I get to spend and experience these things with Arne. So all the new things that, like we've just come from a amazing trip to Antarctica. I wouldn't have wanted to do that alone. I really, want to share these experiences with Arne. So I'm so glad that through our work, we get to do all these things together. But when we work at home, actually, Arne is upstairs, I'm downstairs. We see each other at meal times, and that's it. So we are together, but actually, we're quite alone when
Yeah,
we're in
because
the house.
like we have, if we work on a collection, we have like an idea, like a plan. This is the inspiration, and then I start working upstairs on my computer and do designs, and then I email them
Yeah.
downstairs to Carlos, where he's on his computer, and then he gives me feedback, and then I change things if he wants me to change things, or it's also like when we work on the sock collections, the sock yarn. I can do a lot of color combination on my computer, but I get blind after a while. I don't see the difference. And then I email it down to Carlos, and then he can go through them, and then he's tell me what to do. So
Well, let's pedal back a little bit. So you two are not even from the same country. You grew up in completely different setups. Tell me a little bit about like how you grew up and like when did you start knitting?
So I'm Swedish and Spanish. My mom's from Spain. My father is from Sweden. My dad was working abroad, so I grew up as a diplomat child. And I was actually born in Brazil, as my father was working there, or actually, yeah, at the time. And I grew up in South America, and I didn't move back to, or I didn't move to Scandinavia until I was a teenager. My father decided that it was time for us all to move home. His parents, my grandparents, were getting old. We used to go every summer to visit them, and so I spent all my summers in Sweden. But it wasn't until 1983 that I moved permanently to my country. Um, During my life in South America, we had a good life there. My parents were members of a sports club, and we went every weekend to the club. And my mom had a group of friends, and they were the knitters. So they sat around inside, in Venezuela where it was too hot to wear it. They were still knitting all the time, like a group of 10 friends. So I grew up with her and her friends knitting all sorts of things. She didn't do color work, so she doesn't know how to do Fair Isle or any sort of color work, mostly lace knitting. She showed me. I kind of was interested, and then I lost interest. And then when I met Arne, I learned from him. We were working in the fashion industry at the time, and we shifted from designing women's wear to only designing knitwear for men and women and children. And when we actually shifted, I wanted to learn how to knit because I knew how to theoretically design a garment and produce it. I just didn't know how to knit, and so I wanted to learn.
Your mom knitted what kind of style? As far as the technique style, like
oh,
because Arne is knitting
Well, my
Norwegian,
mom's Spanish, so she was a thrower.
so
she
she
had the
was a
needle
thrower.
under the
Okay.
arm,
And you beat her under the arm and she throws.
everything
So
flat.
when I met Arne, I knew how to knit because my mother had taught me, but I threw instead of doing the Norwegian thing. I threw the yarn in, and he looked at me and he shook his head. And actually, the first few years of my knitting career, so I mean, I'm a designer originally and then a knitter after. So I don't correlate those two as being the same thing. So if I don't look at my career as a designer and a knitwear designer, if I look at me as a knitter, I would throw in, and I would do that for the first few years. The first Christmas ball I ever knit was throwing. And then after a few years, Arne said, "Okay, look, we need to streamline your knitting because it's not working very well, and it takes you 10 times
100 years.
the amount of doing it." So he showed me, and after a while, I started picking it up, and I think I've knitted the Norwegian way for about 10 years now. So yeah.
So Arne, how did you learn how to knit?
I learned from at home because I grew up on a small farm in Norway, and we were 4 generations in the house. So there were like a kitchen, that was the main room, and behind the kitchen, that was my great-grandparents' bedroom. Over the kitchen was my parents and my brother and sister, and the other room was my grandparents. And that's all we had.
Right.
And we had like an outhouse and no bathroom. Everything was very...
Or you had an outhouse.
Outhouse, we had to go out. So we had the really old-fashioned way. So like in the 60s, when the hippies from our area didn't... They found out you couldn't live as a hippie anyway, like they didn't work. They came back home, and then they came to our house. Like every night we had like hippies coming to our house, because I guess they thought we were hippies because we were 4 generations in the same house and everything was old-fashioned. So I learned from my mother and my grandmother. They were knitting all the time. My great-grandmother, she was a crocheter. I didn't see her knit, but my grandmother was knitting, and my mother. And I don't remember when I started, because I started very early, and in the summer after work we moved to the mountains.
It's a tradition.
It's a tradition in Norway. You move to another farm out in the mountain, and then there was no electricity or nothing. So in the evenings I was knitting with my grandmother. And she said only lazy people can sit with their hands on their lap. You have to do something.
I like that.
Did it socks walking?
Yeah. My father said that his great-grandmother, she made a pair of socks walking from her house down to Lillehammer.
Wow.
To go shopping, and then she had another pair on the way back.
It was a full day's walk.
It's a full day's walk to go shopping.
So okay, so when you bought that train station that you live in now, it wasn't that like far-fetched for you, because you used to living without a house and without running water and electricity.
It was for me, it was not the big deal. For him, it was worse, because I'm used to having the toilet outside and picking up water somewhere else.
I mean, Carlos, was it like a complete shock when he came home and announced that you guys?
Yeah, it was a huge shock, and then 6 months, and then it took 6 months. I mean, it was a huge shock. But it took a year before we actually moved in. But then once we moved in, I think it's like this in every country. You call the plumber, and the plumber says he's coming on Tuesday. And then he doesn't come on Tuesday. And then he doesn't come the week after. And then you have to start calling and nagging at them. And then they come.
Was the Tuesday in 3 months?
6 months.
6 months.
Yeah, we didn't have running water. And we didn't have a bathroom for 6 months because the plumber kept putting it off all the time. He bought this huge septic tank, and he put it in what is now the garden. He put the septic tank there as a strategy to get us off his back, because once he put the septic tank down, we thought, okay, now we're getting the bathroom. And then it took another 3 months. So anyway, I had to go to the outhouse. We had to carry water, and we had to, for 6 months, which was new for me. But I mean, I took it. I tried to,
You took it as a man.
Yeah, everything in life you need to be open-minded about. I was very open-minded. I didn't like it, especially not getting up in the middle of the night in -10.
And it's quite a far way like it's a little walk, actually. It's not so close to the house.
The outhouse.
It's at the other end of the property, and we have a lot of snow in the winter, so you have to walk in snow up to your waist sometimes to get to the toilet.
Anyway,
so that's our life.
Now, 25 years later, we have a beautiful
2 indoor.
So
Yeah, 20.
now you get to really appreciate the indoor plumbing, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
you know how it is without it.
Indoor
We love
plumbing.
opening the tab
Yeah.
in the kitchen and have water running.
We have
Wow.
underfloor heating. We have 2 bathrooms. We have everything now.
We feel
So
like we're living in
a palace.
palace now compared to
Well, you're living in a palace, but you also call yourself pajama gardeners.
and we do.
Like a little bit about how you manage to balance that seemingly easy lifestyle and being like very casual gardeners with all the pressures of the work that you have.
Because we don't do a lot in the summer, and the summer
Oh, we do a lot in the summer.
Yeah, but the summer is short and it's not dark at night. So in between work, it's so easy to go out in the garden and work in the garden.
I think what happens, because we live where we live, in the part of the world where we live, our winters are quite short. The days are short. And in the summer, the days are very long. And when you have long days, as we do here, it's actually quite difficult to sleep. We sleep more in the winter for sure. And we are more energized and more awake in the summer. So it's not very unusual that we're outside at 6 in the morning, especially on a beautiful summer day, when the sun's up and it's warm. It's not unusual that we're having breakfast outside, wearing our pajamas and at 6 a.m. And then we just, feel like doing stuff in the garden. And it's the same in the evenings. It can be 11 p.m. and we have the sun out and we just don't feel like going to bed because there's so much we can do. So we're actually more efficient in the summer than we are in the.
And also I think that the garden is more or less finished now, as some parts. And when you have planted all the plants and it more or less take care of itself. Yeah. It's not so much work in the garden.
Yeah, and then usually we also work, actually when we work with the Rowan collections, we are actually design them in the summer. Usually the Rowan is the work that we do in July and August. And it's in between the gardening pretty much. I mean, we're up probably at 5 in the morning and we go to bed maybe 11, 12, 1 sometimes. It doesn't get dark here, so we can, the days are very long. And really that's the time when we're the most efficient. And if it's warm, we can spend the whole time outside. We have a nice roof covered porch so that if it rains, we can still enjoy the outdoors. So it's kind of like working in the place that inspires us the most is actually really nice.
I also think that because we live where we live, there is not a lot of temptations around. Like if we were in a city, we could go to a cafe to meet friends, or like you do a lot of things outside your house because you live in small places normally. But in this place, we have no people around. We have like one neighbor we talk to sometimes when she's in her cottage, but she doesn't live here. So
yeah, otherwise we're very isolated.
So you have all the time in the world.
Well, you mentioned in one of the interviews that I saw that you never really late, that like when people still finishing sewing buttons the last second, you have everything ready on times as scheduled, like for all your book releases and everything like that. Do you feel like you are that organized with everything in your life? Like, was it always like that, or was it like learning as you go sort of thing?
We have the professional life is kind of very organized. And then, I mean, like we don't like, even ourselves, we always arrive on time. We don't like being late for anything. But when there is a crisis in our private life, then, all these crazy things happen. It's actually very, very separated, the personal versus the professional.
But we like to be on time when it comes to work because that's how it should be in a way. Like that's when I was studying in the French fashion school, that was rule number 1. You should always be on time. Like when I was a teacher the first year, most of the teachers were French. And if people didn't arrive to the classroom when they should, like we gave them 10 minutes. They could be 10 minutes late, not more. Then we locked the door actually. And students were not allowed in the room because that's something you have to learn if you're going to work in the fashion industry.
Yeah,
fashion is not
when you started Arne and Carlos, it wasn't the knitwear designs that you do now. It was fast fashion.
We were in the high-end fashion industry. We were doing niche women's wear, but very high end. So we were never in the fast fashion where you do
No, we had only
Yeah.
two
two
collections
collections
a
a
year.
year. That's all.
So, and after a while, we also kept some of the designs because if they sold well, we could keep them for the next season. So already then we saw that the fashion wasn't working. Like if you think about how the world was, you shouldn't just buy and throw away.
Yeah, we were very against that.
So we were very early with that, and like I remember we did a collection with jeans, and it was what you call that again?
Organic cotton.
Organic cotton. That was new back then, and hardly no one in Norway understood what we were talking about. Because
but you were very successful in what you were doing. Like you were in very high-end stores, you were selling well. Like what made you decide to stop and change the way?
There was an issue. So the best year that we had was 2008. And that's also the year when Iceland collapsed and the financial crisis was a fact in the USA, especially, but also in Europe. And 2009 was also a very good year for us. In terms of what we were doing, it was going very well. And our customers were, these fantastic stores like Liberty in London. We had Barney's. We had
Takashimaya,
we had what's it called? Harvey Nichols, all these really amazing ASOS. We were selling to ASOS. Yeah. But the thing was that they were struggling to sell their goods because there was a financial crisis and people weren't buying. So in 2008 was fine, but in 2009, whenever something came into the stores, it was put on sale immediately and nobody was buying it. So we started getting very nervous about the situation because if people don't buy it, then you get, they cancel your orders or the future orders, or they don't pay you, which is even worse. And I remember especially Liberty in London, they were going through, and Barney's too. Barney's went bankrupt. But anyway, Liberty in London, for example, they were struggling with their financial situation, so they weren't paying us on time, and we were as a small independent brand, we needed to get the money so that we could pay our producers so that they wouldn't go bankrupt. So it was this kind of vicious circle. And then we went to the shows we were in Paris and in Copenhagen in early 2010 in January, because the men's collections are always earlier than the women's in the high-end fashion calendar. Men's wear is always in January and then in Paris, and then women's wear is in March, and then Copenhagen was in February for both. But anyway, we went to Paris and we went to Copenhagen, and we were realizing that a lot of the big customers, they weren't placing big orders anymore because they couldn't afford it. And then we were getting all these kind of happy housewives that were, starting up a new shop. I don't know why, probably because they lost their job or something. And their husband had some money. And then we knew that.
And they wanted most of the garments in their size.
Yeah.
Because if they didn't sell it, they could use it themselves.
Right.
Yes. So
not a good business idea.
So yeah. So we knew we were in trouble because our orders were shrinking. The size of the orders was shrinking, but the number of customers was increasing. So we decided that we were afraid to take the risk in 2010 because we thought that if this situation with the financial crisis continues, eventually we're not going to get paid. We're going to have a lot of goods that we've produced. We're not going to pay, and then we're going to have problems paying our factories in Peru. And we didn't want to get in a situation where some other people, especially in a third world country, where they really need their money, that they would suffer. So we decided to cancel all our orders before they were produced. That way, they were very disappointed, but that way, at least we did the right thing in terms of we can't guarantee that we will be able to pay you if we don't get paid. So we're not going to start this whole thing here. And usually the factories, they adapt anyway. So yeah. I think it was a good decision to do. And then
to me, it's like, it sounds all good 10 years later or 15 years later.
Yeah.
But at the time, it must have been a very difficult decision, because when you first started, when you first moved to this house, you had some odd jobs, and then ARNE CARLOS became slowly successful. So it was like all progressing in the right direction. But to go from the point of success to a point of like, okay, now let's scrap it all and start again, must have been very difficult.
was really hard, I think. For me, it was very hard.
Yeah,
I remember.
it was hard,
Yeah.
but it was also only a state of mind, I think. It was hard for a while, but we realized since then that we have this ability to renew ourselves all the time, so that I feel that we're always a couple of steps ahead, so that we never really, I mean, it's hard, but it's actually the decision was hard.
The
Let's
decision is
cancel.
really hard because at the time, like when we were in the fashion industry, we were like in the newspapers and in television, like from day one, since we made the first collection. So in the fashion world, everybody in Norway knew who we were. And since we had like the best shops all over, like there was a lot of people who knew about us, and we had a lot of press.
Yeah.
And taking that decision was kind of like you gave up in a way.
No,
You
it wasn't that.
for me, it felt a little bit like we were giving up in a way.
But it
Because
didn't take long after
No,
before we realized that
it went over like
yeah,
this.
exactly.
So
It was a good decision, and if we wouldn't have done it, we would have probably not been here today.
Well,
So it was
let me ask you this thing, because like when people think knitting, right, like this general, like you take world population's view, they imagine like little old grandmas sitting home knitting. So like people don't really appreciate the craft and don't take it seriously and don't understand the level of skill that goes into it. And I'm talking like both you and I, we all trying to change that perception in the world, but like it's the layman sort of view. Was that part of like trouble sort of to go from high fashion into something that supposedly grandmas did?
No, because
that was never a problem.
our view our view was always at that time, even it was that we could create these beautiful pieces of knitwear. I mean, when we collaborated with Comme des Garçons, the very important Japanese brand that is really at the pinnacle of the conceptual high-end fashion. When we work with Rei Kawakubo and design for such a desirable brand about, around people with a lot of money, we kind of realized that, we can take what we do and we can bring it to a group of people who would actually enjoy doing the designs themselves, knitting the designs themselves. So we never thought of it as downgrading it.
No, it was more like we saw the situation in the world with the financial crisis and that our stores got bankrupt and stuff. We were thinking, why don't we just skip one branch or lead? Was that English?
Manufacturer.
We go from the design to the producer. So let's just do the pattern and people can make it themselves. Because in the fashion world also, if you have a red sweater, you can bet there's a lot of people who want to have it in another color and maybe only 10 in blue or things like that, or 2.
Right.
And that's also a problem because you can't produce so few garments in a factory.
Yeah.
So by doing the pattern and leaving the production to the people to the buyer, it seems more correct at the time.
Yeah.
And I think it's still a good idea.
And we never thought about the grandmothers either. I mean, I think we had more in mind, brands like Kenzo or Missoni that are kind of heritage knitwear or knitting brands. And the idea that people could do this themselves. Not necessarily because,
But we understood quickly when we stopped the fashion world and we did the Christmas ball book, how that exploded. It was like it opened up a totally new universe. At the time in Norway, most knitters, they were like part of the Arts and Crafts Society. And at the time they did wrist warmers. That was the big thing in Norway. Sometimes with the beading on. That was the only thing people made. A lot of people didn't knit garments anymore. So
how did you come up with the idea of Christmas balls?
Well, originally it was an idea. We were working with Comme des Garçons doing a collection for them, a co-branded collection together with Rei Kawakubo. And we just suggested because it was going to be launched for Christmas. And we thought that knitted Christmas balls with traditional Scandinavian and Norwegian motifs would look quite nice in their stores because their stores are quite specific. They're very special. They're very curated and they're very artsy. So the idea of the whole thing knitted en masse was something that we thought they would love. And she loved the idea. And then when we quit when we kind of canceled our orders, 2 years later, we decided to do the book. And I remember one thing. I remember because the book became a huge hit in Norway. It went straight into number 3, and it ended up at number 1 on the bestseller list. And I remember this lady coming up to Arne and me and saying, I'm a middle-aged woman. I don't feel very cool. But now I'm knitting these Christmas balls and I feel like the coolest woman on earth. So thank you so much for making me so cool. And that was kind of like the start of something new for us. We realized that we could do, we could inspire people and make them feel cool pretty much with, the designs that we came up. In this case, the knitted balls, which then became other knitted dolls and eggs and whatever we did.
Well, when you started with the book, like you mentioned that like you were very popular in Norway already, did you have the vision of world domination and like spreading your books everywhere else?
No, and it came as a big shock in 2011. So the book was published. So we left the fashion industry. We canceled our orders in January 2010. And then by Easter 2010, we'd opened a pop-up store in the middle of nowhere in our house.
Then we already started the doll project.
Yeah.
We had knitted dolls in the house.
Yeah,
already.
but we hadn't published the book yet, Arne.
No.
And we opened a pop-up store in our house to sell all the stock that we had, which we actually succeeded in, most of it.
Yeah.
And then in September 2010, the book was published in Norway. And in the summer of 2010, so before the book was published, our American publisher purchased the rights. And then after the American publisher purchased the rights, all the other countries started pouring in. So eventually the book, I think it went into 15 languages, but the real shock came. And so everything was fine. And we were even when we were in the fall promoting the book in Norway, it was crazy, but it was good. And it was fun, and it wasn't such a big shock. We kind of had a feeling it would go really well. But the shock came the year after when the book was published in all the other countries. Suddenly in September, there was this demand for us. We had to travel. We had to go to Germany and the Netherlands and Denmark and Finland to meet all this press and to do all these interviews and all these events. And I remember that in the end of the year in December, we were both kind of half dead. We were so tired. It was just too much, and we couldn't handle it. It was a really hard fall. And that's when the big shock came, and we weren't even expecting it. And we couldn't even believe that it would be so much work. If we would have known, I don't know.
I don't know. But it was fun.
Yeah.
When you have like one very successful book, and it's like, this is the question I ask a lot of designers. Like sometimes a designer will come up with the pattern and it becomes an instant hit. And then there is this added pressure of like, what else you're going to create that's also going to be a hit. Was that difficult to go from like this one time wonder into something that can be sustainable business and continue with the book publishing and your career?
We were actually okay. The first 3 books were huge hits, all 3 of them. 4 actually. The garden one flopped in the US, but it was a big hit in Norway and in Denmark and many other countries. So we had 4 in Norway. We had 4 really big hits after each other. But eventually, what happens is, the world kind of catches up. When we did our Christmas ball book in Norway, no knitting book had gotten on the bestseller list for nonfiction. No knitting book had sold as many copies. And suddenly this book makes such a big hit. And then what happens is other publishers in Norway start looking at the formula. And so...
Because, when we did the Christmas balls, there was only one theme. There was only Christmas balls, and that was never done before. So the publisher also was like, half of the publishing house was very anxious. They were not so sure about this, and half was really, let's go for it, because it was a new thing. And it took maybe 1 year, and then suddenly other publisher companies started to publish books. They had never published a knitting book before, but now they came
suddenly
with
when you have
one theme.
Suddenly,
like a book with socks, a book with it's like So, you know, that's the only thing we can be sure of is that if you succeed with something, you have to look out for a new thing, because you know you will never be the only one
Yeah.
who work on exactly that. That happens all the time.
Yeah, so suddenly there's this, or was this publishing house in Norway, very well known only for publishing political books. That's all. Political books, the political publishing house,
Suddenly they do
which
knitting
then,
books.
yeah, which then suddenly launches a knitting book, and then you know that you're in trouble. So we went from, in 2010, we had the only knitting book, and it went into the bestseller lists. And then in 2014, there were maybe 70 or 80 new published knitting books in the market. So the competition becomes huge, and then you're kind of in a situation where you know that you're not going to be able to have a big success again. So you kind of have to start looking for a new way out. And in our case, it became the YouTube channel. We're celebrating 10 years this year of our YouTube channel. And in 2015, that's when it started to, you know, our last book, we made it in 2017, and then we left. We haven't written a book since then. And in 2015, we started with a new project which was the YouTube channel, which was kind of like the book, but in a completely new format with television, which we're still doing today.
I mean, the YouTube channel is an interesting space because you sort of like, nobody can tell you what to do, right? Like it's your space and you can throw in there anything you want. And YouTube do that a lot, because some of your YouTube episodes are just chatting and like you telling a story how you got lost on the way to buying something or shopping, and it took you, instead of 15 minutes, 2 hours to get somewhere, or you're talking about the gardening tours. So it's not like purely a YouTube channel with clear vision that you're gonna be like teaching like very pink knits or something, giving tutorials or teaching Norwegian pearl or whatever it is, right? It's such a like mixed bag. It's sort of like that chopped salad that you open the refrigerator, see what's there, and you like create something. Tell me like your vision for your channel. Was there like ever a business plan or some like goal of what you're trying? Who is your target audience? What you're trying to achieve? How did you go into that?
It was supposed to be a knitting channel, and it was supposed to be knitting tutorials, and we were supposed to publish one knitting tutorial per week. The problem is our life is not only about knitting. We have many other interests as well, and we realized very soon that we couldn't just keep it to that we had to.
There's a limit to how many videos you can do on Norwegian pearl.
Yeah, and we wanted to share more. We wanted to be more of a lifestyle channel. So we were thinking, if we do knitting and crochet and embroidery, and then we put in some cooking and some gardening, and then people get an idea of what our life is like in Norway. That's kind of like
and you know, it started also because we were contacted by a television producer company in Belgium. And because they wanted to do like daytime TV for women, because the magazines didn't sell anymore. So they were thinking where the magazines were, the TV should take the place for the magazines. But then they didn't, they wanted to speak Norwegian and have a translator. And there were people from Belgium coming to our house to film. And we were like, no, we can do this ourselves with Norwegian film or Norwegian people. So,
well, when you start the YouTube channel, there is this, and like ask me how I know, right? There is this feeling that you're just being silly because you're sitting in front of that camera and you're talking to God knows who, right? And you're like, why am I doing this? Why am I making a fool out of myself? Why am I putting myself out there? Nobody is even watching it. How did it go from that imposter syndrome that you must have had to have at the beginning to like where now you just like turn the camera on and like away you chat?
Oh yeah, I didn't like it in the beginning.
No, I liked it.
It wasn't really our idea to start the channel. It was actually a TV company that proposed us that they wanted to start this YouTube channel with us. And actually that's how we started it. Then the TV company got into trouble
The one I
financially.
talked about.
Yeah. So then we bought them out, and we kept. I mean, we bought them out together with three people from the company that kind of got fired, and they now have different jobs. So we own the channel, 5 people. Two of them are here, and then we've got camera person, a director, and a project manager. So originally, I didn't like it. I didn't feel comfortable in front of the camera. I didn't feel like I knew anything either. I felt like I was just sitting there, and Arne was doing all the work.
But no, you do cooking, then you know
Yeah,
everything.
no, but originally it was like that, and I really didn't enjoy it at all. And I spent several years questioning this, and then I didn't like reading comments either because I took it personally. Everything that people wrote,
Yeah.
I took it very personally. I got very upset about things that, it takes a little while to get used to it. But in my personal, I mean, I can only talk about my own experience. When the pandemic came in 2020 and we were locked in, I really needed to find a place where I could, let out a lot of my frustration and a lot of my fears.
I mean, we were alone on top of a mountain. There were no one here, so
I think
the lockdown was good for us.
Right. So when lockdown came and we started posting the podcast, we hadn't done the podcast before that. Well, we're just talking about everything. That's when I started to feel like my voice was coming out, and I was, able to show people a little bit more of who I am. So for me, definitely 5 years. So we started in the end of those 4 years. We started in the end of 2015, and it was in March or February 2020 when we started podcasting that I started really feeling comfortable and enjoying what we do now. And you, I think, is different.
Yeah, for me, it was never a problem because I don't care how many people watch me, or that's not, I just don't think about it. And I never read comments. Maybe I have done it like so, but I can't, it's so long ago. Because that's something I learned really early. I was listening to this program on TV, on the radio, and they talked about like if you start to get famous and if you put yourself out on the internet, you should never read comments because it's not good for you, or you should have people reading them for you.
Yeah.
Because people just write without reading what they write, and then they post it, and sometimes the writing can be very bad if it's not written the perfect way, or people, they don't know you. Like,
right.
So
it feels strange, like when you're talking about people not knowing you, but then you go places and you are a celebrity and people approach you like they do know you. Does it feel bizarre? Because like there you are living in your house, just the two of you communicating through email between the first and second floor, and then you go out there and there is this swarms of fans that come.
We're used to it. Sometimes it's actually quite funny because people will tell us something that we've said,
and we don't remember.
That we don't remember because
So they know more about us. But I think that's more because of the COVID, the lockdown, and the what do you call that? And the quarantine podcast?
Yeah, the quarantine.
So that I think after that, a lot of people come up to us and they say that, oh, thank you for saving me through lockdown because it helped them coming through the lockdown and things like that. And at the time we didn't remember, we don't remember what we talk about, and we talk about anything. So we have people now coming to our cruises and the garden tours we do, and they know everything about us. So
that was
nice.
I have a funny story about that actually, because we actually started doing our knitting cruises before the pandemic. We did one in 2018, and then we did a couple in 2019. And by then we weren't as well known, and we didn't do the podcast, so people didn't really know us except for what we were doing in the tutorials. And so in and the ship, so we don't do a regular cruise. It's like a bus, really. The ship goes to the north with supplies north of Norway, and it stops 34 times. And on the northbound, it stops in the big cities. And we would usually get off, and then Arne and I would go thrift shopping on our own because nobody knew what we were doing. They would go buy their yarn,
doesn't work anymore.
And we would go thrift shopping. And then the pandemic came. We were under lockdown. We didn't do a cruise for almost 3 years. And then on our first cruise in 2022, we were going to get ready to go thrift shopping. And then somebody in the group said, "You're going thrift shopping, right? Can we come?" And then suddenly we had 40 people with us going into the thrift
But I think
stores.
that is fun.
And I said to Arne, "Wow, our lives have, since the pandemic, they've changed a lot. And this is how it's going to be now." And yes, we take everybody thrift shopping
Yeah,
now.
we can't keep anything for ourselves anymore. So we share all the thrift stores.
Yeah.
It's fine. We collect different things.
When you started, you said you understood that you have to be ahead of the time and ahead of the wave. Does that add like extra pressure on you because you are in a comfortable place now when people really know you, when people book your cruises 2 years in advance? Are you already concerned about that market being saturated and what you're gonna do next?
I think we've been thinking about it because
Yeah.
you'll see there are more cruises now than when we started. We see
Again.
that other people now, they also start to do knitting cruises.
Right.
So we can't have that for ourselves anymore. So, but I think we have a really good group of customers and we have friends and we have, so I think that we can do this for a while still, but we are always looking for other things because we know that the day can come that thing stops and then you have to be ready for the next thing.
We're kind of keeping our eyes open. You never know what's going to happen next. So we're keeping our eyes open and trying to figure things out. Usually we don't really stress too much about these things because they usually come to us when we kind of start feeling when we get the feeling that it's gonna be over. It's gonna change, when I say soon, I don't mean tomorrow, but it's gonna eventually change in a year or so. Then we start thinking about other things. I don't feel that we're in a place right now where we have to worry too much about it.
But I think this is something we learned from working in the fashion industry, because you have to be alert all the time because you need to know what's going on in the world, because what's going on in the world will affect your work no matter what you do. And that is something I think we brought that with us from the fashion world.
Because do you ever get burned out with all of that? Because like all this popularity, all this, whether you read the comments or you just hear about them, whether one person wants to come with you on thrift shopping or 40, like at some point it might just be overwhelming. Like, do you get overwhelmed? Do you get burnout?
No, not really. I mean, we get a little tired we're getting older, so obviously there will be a point. I mean, maybe the market will never get saturated. Maybe we'll just get old and physically we will, find that going on these trips is too much. But we don't get overwhelmed. Both Arne and I are very social people. We love, we get inspired by a lot of things, but one of the things that inspires us the most is really meeting people and talking and learning about their history, their lives. So when we meet these people on these cruises, it's very open-minded from our side, and we really do become friends with many of them afterwards.
And some people come on 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 trips, so they become friends. And like this morning, I was going through one of the people who've been traveling with us. She gave me the paper on her Norwegian family. So this morning I went through the digital archive in Norway, the church books, and I found a lot of information that I'm going to email to her. So that's also another interest which I can share with some of the people who come on our cruises. And I think that is meaningful. And I really like that. So they're not strangers.
No, it's meeting them and spending time with them is actually a very meaningful thing for us. I think that's probably also the reason why they keep coming back, because it's very genuine from our side. We meet these people, we enjoy spending time with them, and I think it shows. Because if you just do it for the money and kind of pretend like you like them, and then whenever you have a chance, you go away, and then you come out when you have to. It's not, then you shouldn't be doing it, in my opinion.
No, and spend so much time with people, you learn so much about them, and you get their stories. And
right. Well, talking about your last trip to Antarctica, and Arne, I sort of told it to you before we started recording. It looked wonderful. I was fascinated to watch it all on TV. I was also a little bit freaking out imagining myself going to something like this because, seeing those friendly whales playing around your kayaks, I don't know, that didn't bring me much peace. This is what my nightmares are made out of.
It's not the whale you should be worried about, it's the leopard seal.
You see, there is more.
There are more.
Yeah.
But you very active. You're going to this cruise. It's not just to teach the class and spend couple lazy hours with the knitters on the thing. You participate in everything.
Everybody, the whole group participates. That's the wonderful as well. I mean, we're there on a common mission, to spend some time together and knit a project and meet other like-minded people. But then they all sign up for all these activities like the canoe, the kayaking. Some people signed up and went camping on Antarctica on the mainland, snowshoeing as well, and then science boats.
And you see, there's not a lot of teaching because we're always around. So if people want to learn something or want to show them how we do things, we show them how we do things. But it's not teaching. It's not like we have a class every day because these trips are too beautiful. You can't sit and have a class. You have to look out at the nature and do hikes and
And I think out of the 36 people that were in our group, I think most of them did the kayak thing.
I
mean, in different occasions, but we couldn't get all on the same one. But there was kayaking every day, and most of the people actually did it.
And it's not only for knitters either, because we have one couple, they've been on 2 tours now, and
they don't knit.
None of them are knitters, but they like to be in the group with nice people.
Yeah, very nice people.
Well, how do you decide where you're going next? Because you've traveled all over the globe pretty much at this point. How do you decide what's going to tickle your fancy for the next trip?
So originally it started with Norway. Obviously, we're from Norway, and we work with a Norwegian travel agency. And then our concept with the knitting cruise under it, we call it knitting under the Northern Lights and knitting under the midnight sun. It's because we have this amazing product in Norway, the Hurtigruten, which is the coastal express. It travels from Bergen up to the north in Kirkenes, crossing the Arctic Circle, and then it turns around and it goes down again. You can either do the northbound or you can do both, the classic round journey. And it stops 34 times each way. It's unique because it's subsidized by the government. It's a cargo ship, it's a postal ship, and it also brings passengers, and it also works like a ferry. It's what we love about it is that people that go on our trips with us, they're not on a Disney World cruise as we call the other cruises. This is actually, if we are in Bodø on a Friday, the people that are with us, they're going to experience a whole bunch of teenagers that actually study in Bodø in the weeks, and then on the weekends they go to their families in Lofoten, the islands on the other side of the Vestfjord. So it's actually transporting the kids back home for the weekend. It's local, and that was the original idea. But then, because of things happening in Hurtigruten split into two, suddenly there are 2 companies running the coastal route according to what the government has instructed. And then Hurtigruten started doing the expedition journeys, which is the Antarctica trip. And then we do one called Knitting on Top of the World, which goes up to Svalbard. Hence the sweater. So it started with a Norwegian coastal. Then we went on other trips, which are more the active expedition with the kayaking and all that. And then we have our passion for gardening. Some of the people on our trip said, when are you going to do a garden tour? We'd love to be with you on a garden tour. So we've done the gardens of northern Italy, mainly around the lakes. We've done that a couple of years. Yeah. Now we're doing the gardens of England. This is the 2nd year we're going to do it. And then we're going to probably do the gardens of Italy next year.
And we've done Japan.
And then we've done Japan because we've been working in Japan for so long. We have a big love and passion for Japan. And we actually, when the tsunami came, we were there to help out and do a lot of stuff there. So it's one of those countries that is very close to our hearts. We've done a couple of trips, and now we're going to South Africa. So
we go to places we like.
Yeah.
sometimes places we didn't know we liked, like Antarctica. We had
Right, yeah.
no dream about going there, but now we love it.
And
So
South Africa is all about, again, it's our passion for gardens, of course, but it's also combined with a love for anything that is handmade. So all the crafts, there's some incredible crafts in South Africa. And of course, there's mohair and there's a lot of knitting too. So
and the animal wildlife.
and yeah, of course, that too. So
Well,
yeah,
talking of wild animals, have you met the polar bear yet?
No, we've seen it from the ship, luckily. So we have not met it.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness.
And you know, in Norway, the rules, the polar bears are only up in Svalbard, not on the mainland. But the government has imposed some very strict rules. So if you see a polar bear, you're actually supposed to retreat as fast as you can. If about like in our case, when we saw the polar bear twice, the ship actually spotted it, but it's not allowed to follow it or even approach. So we saw it from maybe, I don't know, 2 kilometers distance. We had to use the zoom on the mobile phone and then trust that somebody had a good camera.
Yeah, because it's far away.
So we could, I mean, we saw a little spot like that.
The last one was on the landing where we actually should go ashore and look at the site, and there was a polar bear. So that was canceled because you know they're quick if they come running. So they look cute, but you don't want to meet them.
Well, tell me a little bit about both of your sweaters.
So this one is from the polar bears. Of course, all the trips we've done to Svalbard, and it was made for Robin. So and the pattern is available, but it's knitted flat. But I prefer to do things the old traditional way. So if it can be knitted on the round, I knit it on the round. So this is knitted on the round with my number of stitches.
Yeah.
And this one is, I made it just before we went to Antarctica because we couldn't go to Antarctica with a polar bear sweater.
Because then people would comment.
Then you will have like all these comments. There's no polar bears in Antarctica. So I made this one.
Well, I'm laughing when you said my number of stitches because you told me the story about your grandma. Tell it to our viewers.
Yeah, no, so we have a lot of patterns from my grandmother, and most of them have like 3 sizes. But some of the patterns that she made, she has written her name on the pattern, and her name was Magnhild. So it says Magnhild, and then the number of stitches. And some also have my grandfather's name and his number of stitches. Because when I grew up in the grocery store in the basement, they sold yarn, and there were only 2 types of yarn. There was one with acrylic and one pure wool, and for the same needle. So it's all about the needle. Like when people talk about the weight, like in English, I have no clue what people are talking about. Because for me, it's the needle size that counts, and you can use any needle if you want to have a looser or tighter or so. These are made the old way. So
and then you know I also want to mention one thing. If you look at the collar and my polar bear sweater, you know, it kind of there is a break here in the design. And then if you look at Arne's penguins, we did have an issue there. He was finishing up the sweater, and then we realized that if we would have had this kind of neckline, it would have cut the head of the front penguin. So then
I took it up.
So then we had to sit down, and the sweater was already knitted because you know when you knit in the round, you knit it all the way up and then you cut it. So it was about we had a session, a really good. But I love those. You know, it's a very creative session. Yeah. It's kind of like we cannot under any circumstances cut the head of the penguin. So now we need to fix this issue, which neither of us had thought about, and create a new kind of, it's like an exercise in creativity. What do we do now so that we don't cut? And the solution was a smaller rib on the neckline and bring it up a little bit. But it actually looks very good.
Yeah, because this one, it doesn't matter because this is all over. So you can cut wherever you want. And if this was like a Setesdal sweater, the traditional sweater from the folk costume in Norway in the south, with the X and the O, it doesn't matter where you cut it.
Right.
But we couldn't cut the head.
No, not on this penguin.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the cutting of the heads. So when you talk about the traditional Norwegian knitting, sticks were very common, right?
Oh, sticks, yeah, you sticked everything.
Every time.
So if like you just knit the bottom up So you have smiling stitches, so it doesn't look like it's something went wrong in the production, kind of.
So,
and then you cut
yeah.
and sew in the sleeves.
I wanted a fun fact, actually. So Norwegians, they knit in the round, right? The circular needle is not a very old invention. It's actually quite new. In the old days, and Annemor has actually confirmed this.
Annemor Sundbø,
Annemor
she's like,
Sundbø, yeah, she's a very important authority on cultural history, especially related to, she's a weaver originally, but also master knitter. And she confirmed it that back in the old days, they would actually use a lot of needles to knit in the round. So like the small ones.
Right.
So it was kind of like, I don't know if the Norwegians invented the circular needle, but in any case, they've always done as much as they possibly could to avoid knitting flat. So
And
even using 15 little needles to just be able to.
Well, for people who are terrified of just the word sticking, what would be your advice? How should they start with that?
Buy old garment in the thrift store and practice on that one.
Yeah.
But remember, like we do the sewing, we use the sewing machine with a zigzag. So you zigzag on both sides where you want to cut, and then it's no problem.
Yeah.
And then you sew in the sleeve with the sewing machine, and then there you have another seam. So that will never break up.
Yeah.
And if you want to, and also if you want to make, if you make this one and you want to make it into a jacket, just stick it in the front. Don't add anything. I see now people are adding like a lot of stitches in front, so they have something to cut. But that doesn't make sense for a jacket because
you're gonna make a placket.
Because you make a placket and you cover up the raw edge, and you get that extra when you do the plackets. You don't add anything because then it gets so ugly on the inside, and you need to buy ribbons to sew it on, and there's like no needs.
My mantra is, I have a couple, but one of my mantras is everything's easy when you know how to do it. So in the case of steeking, once you've done it, then you know how to do it, and then it's easy. Practice on an old garment or an old swatch. I mean, if you swatch, if you have swatched, you have something to practice on. You don't have to do it on your, on the sweater that you knitted that you spent 12 months. Try not to think too much about this is so hard. I could never do it. Just take a bloody swatch or an ugly sweater that you don't want to wear anyway. Try it out, and then you're gonna see. When you try it out, you're gonna see that it is easy. And then you're gonna be confident enough to do it in your whatever project. But it's in your mind, it's in your brain. I'll never say that you can't.
But it's something has changed in the knitting world, because when we did the book Norwegian Knit with a Twist, was that in 2012 or something?
Yeah, 13.
Or 13. There were hardly no garments that were not steeked. If they were like inserted sleeves or jackets, they were all steeked. And now, like just not long ago, we got a comment on a video we posted with steeking, and that was from a Norwegian yarn store that didn't know about this, which I find so strange, because it's not long ago since people stopped doing that, or like they never stopped in Norway, because if you go for an old pattern, it's always steeking. But
well, talking about controversial comments, you two are firm non-believers in dominant colors. Let's talk a little bit about it.
You know, the first time we heard about that was in America. There was a lady who taught Norwegian knit in the museum in Seattle, a Nordic museum in Seattle. And I asked her, "What are you teaching?" And she said, "I'm teaching dominant color."
We didn't know what that was.
And I said, "What are you teaching? Like dominant color? What is that?" And then she said, "Like, no, everybody has dominant color, but I don't know what it is." And she didn't even explain to me, like.
And then we went home, and then we went home to Norway, and we talked to our publisher or our editor. This was when we were doing books, and our editor, and then we said, "We've heard about this dominant color thing that we've never heard before."
We heard it in America.
And then our editor said to us, "Yeah, I know. I've just bought a book for, that we're an American book that we're translating into Norwegian, and they have this whole thing on the dominant color, and I have no idea what it is. So I've been trying to, bring it out to people, to other technical people in Norway, and nobody really knows what it is. So
Yeah, no one knew what that was, and now that's a thing. There was a woman in that was in it's Stephen B. in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
She showed me, she talked about, well, she asked which color is dominant, and I said you should try to have even tension. Don't think about uneven tension.
Yeah.
And then she showed me pictures from her phone, and she said, but I need to know which color is dominant, and then look at this. And then there was like a piece knitted, two pieces knitted in black and white, and one was where the white stitches were huge. So it looked like it was white with black, and the other one was the opposite. And she said, but this is what I'm talking about. And I said, but that is bad tension.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, this can get very controversial.
Yeah, now you will have a lot of views and comments on your video.
But the
People get
listen, every comment is an engagement, so bring it on, right?
But don't hate, they hate me for it because I can stand up for it.
Yeah,
no dominant color.
But the bottom line, in terms of this dominant color thing, it's not something that in Norway, if you look back to traditional knitting, it's not something that Norwegians have aspired to have.
No.
Because back then, if you knitted, especially if you were knitting Selbu mittens or Selbu socks for a living, back then they would have gone through a special organization that would then vet.
Actually, they had
everything.
to make this organization in Selbu because knitting became so popular.
Right.
So if you had one black sheep and a white sheep, they made yarn and then they made mittens, and everybody wanted to sell their mittens. But some of these mittens were so badly knitted.
Yeah, and then so they
sell them.
They looked at every one of them, and some of them were taken out of, because it was actually production. People earned a living. And back then, I mean, we're talking about in Satistal, we're talking 1850. In Selbu, we're talking more 1880, 1890, up until 1930. The production in Selbu is until the 30s, around there. And it was a worldwide. They were hand knitting for the whole world. They didn't aspire. They aspired to have even tension and every stitch the same size because it was going into manufacturing. It was production. And so something has happened from the original idea that you're making a living and you have to present something that is acceptable into it becoming a thing in nowadays. We don't know how it happened. We don't know who was responsible. But personally, when we look at old knitwear, we have a big collection of garments as well from the past. When we look at it, we can't really understand why you would want one of your color, the stitches in one of your color to be bigger than the other.
You know, if you see that on the garment, it's the knitter's fault.
Yeah, sometimes when sometimes
it's not something you aim to get.
Exactly. Sometimes when I knit, I get sloppy. We're talking, we're doing the knitting in Antarctica. I was knitting the penguin hat. I was talking to people, and then when I looked at it, I had some stitches were very tight and some were very loose, and that's not good enough. So I had
or you can take it out, or you can pull from the back.
No,
I do that if I have a loose stitch.
I have to take it out.
but back when I grew up, the best compliment you could get was if someone looked at your knitting and they said, "Wow, it looks machine made." That's the best compliment. Yeah.
So anyway, we've never said it doesn't exist. We've just said that
we've seen it, so we know it exists, but it's not what we want.
It's not what we aspire. It's not what we aspire to do in Norway. No. And when we spoke with Annemor,
younger people,
right? Again, and when we spoke to Annemor about it, again, she showed us one of the techniques that you can use so that you can tighten up stitches that are loose. Because sometimes, they travel different distances, so one might be bigger than the other. But she showed us an old traditional technique where you pull whatever is from behind.
Yeah, and that's when she did what we call loose, like flies in Norwegian. It's like lice. Yeah, it's like little loose. It's like one dot. And sometimes when you do that, if it's black with white dots, the white dots can be bigger if you're not careful. And then she showed us, and she said, "Now I'm going to show you a way to remove what they call dominant color, because that's not what you want."
So we have techniques in Norway that have been especially developed to not even avoid it, but to correct it. So another one is because we knit from the finger, The old-fashioned way of doing it is you have the main color, the one that you're using the most, over your finger, and then you're throwing in the secondary color. But if you look at the chart, right, you can see quickly which is the color you'll be using the most on a given row. And in one row it may be white, and then in the other row it may be black. So what you do is you alternate. So you put the color you're using the most regardless.
Sorry, this is what I do, but like I was thinking, am I breaking rules? Apparently,
No.
The freedom to do that.
No, but maybe that's what you grew up with also.
Well, I didn't grow up with anything because I only learned how to knit 7 years ago. So
yeah,
I'm learning like right now.
You're doing it the right way. I mean, not the right way, but you're doing it a way that we would say
once I met a lady in a workshop in America. She was from Belarus, and she knitted exactly the same way as I did. And
well, let's talk about one more thing. YouTube is a wonderful place to learn things. It's also a wonderful place to find advice that's completely wrong and what they claim it to be. So we talked about it before we started about the Norwegian pearl and how sometimes you look at the tutorials and that's not the Norwegian pearl that you know.
I saw one. There was the lady. She did the Norwegian pearl a very strange way, but she said, "I'm going to show you the Norwegian pearl." And then she wrapped the yarn around the finger, and she started to move the finger back towards her to catch the yarn, and the yarn went back again. And it was not even close to what we do in Norway, but she was very overbevisende.
Convincing.
Convincing. This is what you. And then I had to read her comments, and some comments were, "Oh, this is so much more easier to understand than like when ARNE CARLOS is doing it. Then I don't understand anything, but this was so much easier." But it's not a Norwegian pearl, and that's a problem sometimes because there's no sensor. There should be some.
You know what? Like I'm trying to tell my mom that not everything that she sees on internet is true. And it's a high probability that it's not. So this is one of those examples. You know, if you want to learn Norwegian pearl, maybe ask a Norwegian how to do it.
It doesn't have to be us. You can ask another Norwegian.
Or you can ask a person from Sweden or Denmark.
Don't ask a Swede.
Oh, if they are they do it the same way.
You know that the Swedes, they do everything.
No, they do it the same way. Because this is the old way all over Scandinavia.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I'm so grateful that you agreed to be guests of my channel. I had a blast. I've learned a lot, and I would love to be on one of your cruises one day, maybe.
Please come.
I'm looking forward to seeing you somewhere, maybe on the cruise, maybe in some festival.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah. I mean, we are going to be. Are you going to Nashville?
Maybe I am. I don't know. I didn't even know that.
There's a yarn festival there in March.
You know what? We might just meet there.
That would be lovely. We're going.
It's my New Year resolution for 2025 to travel as much as I can. So I might find myself in Nashville.
Come to Nashville in March and we'll have a date there.
Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah. Well,
thank you for being my guest today. It was really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.